Welcome, everyone. Today, we are featuring the Sleep Monitoring Lab with the director, Rebecca Spencer. The title of our talk is Assessing Sleep Physiology and Function. For those of you who don't know me, I am Lisa Korbieski, the Director of Communications and Marketing here at IELTS. We hope that with these bi-weekly seminars, you'll discover what great resources that the centralized UMass Amherst core facilities offer to our campus community, the New England region, and beyond. Next, just a few housekeeping items. The seminar is being recorded, as you just heard. All replays of this seminar and the other ones in the series can be found on our website. I will put a link in the chat. Please save the questions till the end of the presentation, and then please just unmute yourself and ask your questions. Next, I would like to introduce you to Andrew Bernard, the director of our core facilities. Andrew?
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to try to find the script real quick. Thank you all for joining us. As Lisa mentioned, my name is Andrew Bernard, the director of centralized core facilities, and grateful for you all taking part in the core seminar series. This is the second of the fall 2021 seminar series and our third semester so far. We're glad to continue these and see participation. If you have ideas for other seminars you'd like us to host in the future, if you're a faculty member and have some participation you'd like to contribute, we'd love to hear from you. As many of you know, the cores are open to anyone from students through senior scientists, regardless of your affiliation. And we are dependent on your utilization to make sure that the academics and the superiors at the institution know our worth. In order to make sure that folks know that we are more than just a cost operation, we are really reliant on acknowledgements and making sure that those who use the cores give proper accreditation. We have some tools that can help you make sure you use acknowledgements in the proper format. I'll be sure to put the link in the chat when we get going. But most importantly, when you're working with the cores, you're working with the experts who've spent their careers establishing protocols and figuring out how to make these tools most successful for your own research projects. So giving them contribution credit as you go forward is really critical to their own growth and development. Our cores are state-of-the-art. Our cores are really well supplied with great equipment and great technologies, but it's these experts who make sure these tools are functional, available for everybody. So please do reach out. Make sure you, if you have any questions and want to know how to work with them, you don't hesitate to ask. If you have any questions on the broad spectrum of how to access these cores, I'm happy to put you in touch and find out bigger ways we can work together. I'm grateful for you all taking part again, as I mentioned, and I'm most grateful for Dr. Rebecca Spencer speaking for us today, giving an overview of what the sleep lab contains. It's one of our human subjects cores, which what we have is a broad range of everything from cellular all the way up to in-human studies. And I'm looking forward to see what we have to talk about today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Spencer. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Lisa, for setting me up for this, and for all of those that are here. I see many familiar faces, and that's great. So some of those that have that are familiar to me have seen some of this before, but hopefully I'm integrating in a way that's unique to you. My objective here is to give you some feel for why you would measure sleep and should consider measuring sleep in studies, where it might be important, what some of the facilities are that we have here on campus, and how they might be useful to you and the work that you want to do. So the first thing to start with is to say that I am just representing one of the team of people that work in the sleep lab. And really the work is, as Andrew pointed out, it's not just that we have awesome facilities, it's that we have this awesome team that come together and can help you with your project. So we have Nick Hathaway, who's a project manager. So for the projects that we work on, he is there to really help a project be pulled together and take off from top to bottom. So we can help design the study and implement it, and have somebody there to collect the data and oversee the staff that we need to collect that data. Mary Emma Searles is somebody who works the sleep lab, but has also been useful for many other projects in the human testing facilities. So Mary Emma does the recruiting of human subject participants, which, as many people that do that kind of work know, is one of the biggest challenges of the work that we do, is finding the participant populations to be part of our study. Kyle Koenig is a graduate student who oversees a lot of our data collection and analysis, and really is the guru behind getting what we can do with the data, particularly once we have it. So, and then I'm just the director who oversees the different pieces here, but happy to be the talking head for today. So I want to first say, like, why would you think about studying sleep? And I know some of you have seen this slide before, but it's really important to think about why is sleep important, and why do we see it coming up more and more in the device world, in the tech world, and even in the health world. And that's because the more we learn about sleep, the more we see the importance of sleep for a lot of different functions. So many people know that our work is really focused on the function of sleep towards memory and decision making and those cognitive functions. But there's also plenty of evidence to suggest that sleep really underlies immune function. And we also know now more and more about this function of sleep in clearing brain waste. And it's thought that if there's a failure of that cleaning process, that you can get toxic buildup, neurotoxic buildup, that actually can cause deficits as much as neurodegeneration and some other brain-based diseases. So that's really pointing to the critical nature of sleep and why sleep is so important to healthy physical, but also mental function. But then we also know on the other side of this that many things affect sleep. So sleep can be changed by so many different states. So of course it's changed by development, aging, adolescence. You can see just sleep is really critical to those parts of the trajectory. It can also be affected by socioeconomic status, but also disease status. And so this chicken or egg question with neurodegenerative diseases, for instance, is was there a deficit in sleep that preceded the onset of neurodegenerative diseases, or was there some sort of neurodegenerative disease that took place that then caused some of the sleep problems? And those are important questions to be considering now and in the work that a lot of us are doing. So that's why it's important to think about the role of sleep in many different scientific questions. But what our work has focused on within the Sleep Core is thinking about how to measure sleep better. And that's no small question in the field. We have our gold standard measures of sleep, but those gold standards of measures of sleep are rather inconvenient and rather expensive. And so are there ways that we can make sleep measurement more convenient and more available? On the other end, we can also ask the questions of whether we can intervene on sleep. So we know sleep is important for all of these different physical and mental functions. So can we intervene on sleep in different ways, improve sleep, and thereby, improve some of these sleep-related outcomes? So just thinking first about this question of sleep measurement, we've been interested in how to improve measurements of sleep. And that's something that's really been driven by society. So, there's a lot of different consumer-based devices for measuring sleep. Quite a few people around this building alone are wearing a Fitbit, and that's just one example of these consumer-based devices that can be used to track sleep. And that is because the general public does have some appreciation for the need for good sleep, and they enjoy and appreciate getting the feedback on sleep. But there's this open question as to whether that feedback that they're getting from devices is accurate, and if there's anything we can do to improve on them. So for instance, this recent article focuses on who calls the global misinformation from a lot of these devices. The sad truth about sleep tracking devices was an article in the New York Times. So you can get this sense that as much as there was excitement about these consumer-based devices, we also have some strong recognition about the fallacies and whether that's actually damaging to a person who might be using it. So the device field has really been morphing for a while, and you have a lot of wrist-based devices are the most common devices. And those devices are all based on actigraphy, which means that they contain an accelerometer. And then that accelerometer tells us about movement. And then based on a person's movement, we can estimate whether they're awake or asleep. These estimations tend to be pretty good, but it really depends upon the device. It also likely depends upon the person. And so each device should technically be validated for a particular population. So you can sense right there, there's a lot of work to be done. We also see now in the device field that these devices are changing to to perhaps to improve their quality and their outputs, to improve comfort, and to just improve usability. So some others that we see, there's now a headband-based one. The Dream 2 is one example, but there's a few different ones on the market that are more based on trying to get some of those head-based measurements, and likely is not based on actigraphy, and instead is trying to go for something that's more EEG-based. The Aura Ring is something more similar to the wristwatches with an embedded accelerometer. And so their question is whether we could make something that's just more comfortable or more accessible for participant populations by giving you that information out of a ring as opposed to a wristwatch. So Withings is something that you would lay under your bed. And so the advantage there is it's something that you could use in a lot of different places. We could use it on a cot in a preschool, and it doesn't have to interfere with your choice of favorite watch. There's also nightstand versions of it. So these are not based on actigraphy. There's some different technologies out there that are trying to optimize, whether it's based on sound, whether it's based on Doppler information. There's various different nightstand versions that are trying to get away from touching the participant at all. And you can imagine that there's some populations that might be beneficial for. And then finally, there's some that might go for more of a mask-based, I have it labeled as Dream 2, and that's actually wrong. Something that's more of a mask-based approach, where you're trying to get information from the eyes, and some of them actually claim to have information from other physiological sensors as well. So you can see that this device space is big, and it's expanding every day. And within the sleep field, this is a very hot question as to how can we make consumer devices that are better at measuring sleep and give the person maybe better feedback, but also make it a more usable device. Most of them, as you can see, are focusing on the hardware side, but there's a separate line of work that can also think about the software side. So can we take that data from actigraphy and optimize it to better estimate a person's sleep time? So in the sleep lab, one of the things that we have been doing is assessing various forms of consumer-based devices relative to gold standard polysomnography. So here I'm just giving an example of some different consumer-based devices. We are not sharing the particular ones that we've been working with, but you can take some of those devices and imagine how we could compare it to gold standard polysomnography. So polysomnography is acquiring the information by actually looking at the brain state of the individual. As you can see in this example, the person's wearing electrodes that are then able to pick up on the brain waves, and the brain waves themselves are really what it takes to characterize somebody as awake or asleep. You can also use that information to then further characterize their sleep into individual sleep stages. But most of these devices are really focused on sleep time, sleep efficiency. Some of them are trying to make deeper claims about sleep stages, and I could say more about that. But the important point here is that you've got two different types of measurements. On the left, you have actigraphy that a lot of the consumer-based devices are based on. And then on the right, you have the polysomnography, which is EEG-based, which is really the gold standard measure for sleep. To say just a bit more about polysomnography, this shows you that it's something that can be suitable for different populations. You can go to Netflix and watch our Babies series and see these caps even right down to small infants, 9-month-old infants. So it's a technology that can be used on different populations, but you can imagine that this requires a technician to be present to apply the EEG electrodes. And so that's not a consumer product. That really requires having technicians present, and quite often they have to be certified technicians in order to appropriately apply these things and then interpret the data. And so devices like actigraphy get around that because this is just not very consumer friendly. It's a very expensive technique. So even clinically, there's a push to go more towards actigraphy because this is such an expensive measure. Polysomnography, just for a little background as to what it is, the poly is many, somno is sleep, and graphy is writing. So you have many sleep writings. And that's because the montage of electrodes, it's not just those brain-based EEG measures that you can see up here on the scalp, but you can also see there's electrodes on the eyes. So there'd be one placed on either side of the eyes to pick up on eye movements that are important to characterizing rapid eye movement sleep. And then you also would place one on the chin. So you can see one up here by the cheek, and that's to pick up on muscle movement. So for instance, in REM sleep, we know you go through muscle atonia. And so that muscle atonia we can characterize by having a muscle lead. And REM sleep is also characterized by rapid eye movements. That's where its name comes from. And so we can pick that up with the eye channels. And why is it so important to pick up in REM in particular? Well, that's because REM is the really easy one to confuse with wake. The EEG traces alone from REM sleep look a lot alike wake. So in order to distinguish an EEG trace from REM versus awake, I would have to also have some other information to know that that person was actually asleep, in this case in REM sleep, and not awake. So that's the gold standard, and that's the montage that it takes. And this is just showing you one of the different types of setups that we can use to do that gold standard measurement. So there's just illustrating the EEG, the EOG, and the EMG. This is just to break down and show one of the studies that we've done like I said, evaluating the validity of these devices, and in particular, whether they could pick up on sleep stages. Now, I'll say that often these devices aren't making claims about sleep stages per se, although more and more of them are. They're often referring more towards light versus deep sleep. And we can ask whether they're valid in doing so. So the first question is, what do they mean by light versus deep sleep? And more than likely, their algorithms are considering deep sleep as being the sleep that's hard to wake you up from, which would be composed of that deep, slow wave sleep that occurs early in the night, and it is really hard to wake a person up from. And so therefore, they're probably not likely to be moving a lot, as well as REM sleep. So I mentioned that in REM sleep, you have muscle atonia, so you're not moving a lot. So they're probably making an assumption with these devices that if there's low amounts of movement, then, or extremely low to no amounts of movement, then the person is probably in deep sleep. But if there's low enough movement to be considered asleep, but not that low, there might be some wiggling, then they call it light sleep. So you can try to figure out whether their estimates of light versus deep sleep match anything at all that comes from the gold standard polysomnography. And we considered, just in this plot, the best match to be REM and slow wave sleep. We compared that to the deep sleep from our gold standard measurement. And we also looked at the other forms of sleep and compared that to light sleep. And the long and the short of these plots is that these devices are terrible at measuring light versus deep sleep. You can get that terribleness from kind of how widespread these values are, how some like this are not even centered around zero. In general, the spread of these measures is saying they're very inaccurate at picking up light versus deep sleep. So this is showing some of the older devices, but we see the same with some of the newer devices as well. There's been some other studies looking at, just in this case, they're looking at total sleep time, and are these devices good at something as basic as total sleep time and sleep efficiency? And this summary, I think, shows quite well that the one thing that they are doing reasonably well at is picking up total sleep time. And what I don't have here is sleep efficiency, but they're also reasonably good at that. The Fitbit across studies has tended to do quite well. That's my guess, is that's why they've maintained their place on the market so long. But you can see that a lot of these others, and even Aura and the Whoop that are popular around here, they do quite well with measures of total sleep. So actigraphy can be valid for measuring total sleep and sleep efficiency relative to gold standard polysomnography. It's just currently pretty limited when you look at some of the deeper sleep measures. And it's pretty limited when we start talking about applying these to different populations. I throw this huge table in to say that if I was doing a consult on a potential sleep study, that there's a lot more to think about too than just how good is that device at capturing total sleep time or sleep efficiency. So you can, across each column shows different devices, and each row is showing the other factors that a study would probably take into account before adopting the device. So one concern is the battery life. So we find that if we put these watches on a population in the field, as soon as they have to charge them, they forget to put the device on or they lose the device, and there goes your data. So how long the battery life can last is a big question, big and important question for users of these devices. Particularly when you're using them in research or using them in a population, maybe for a medical intervention, and you have a population that maybe doesn't have a vested interest in looking at that data every day, but instead it's just somebody that's supposed to be either acquiring that feedback, or maybe their doctor's monitoring the feedback, or they have a family monitoring the feedback, or they're doing this, wearing the device only for a study. Those are people where the battery life is particularly important because they will take it off, plug it in, and forget to put it back on. So that's something to look for. More and more, it's important to look for the devices that have auto sleep detection. As you can see, the majority do now. Most devices, even just a few years ago, required that you press a button to tell the device when you're sleeping. Well, participants are terrible, even common everyday use consumers are terrible at remembering to press a button to say, I'm going to sleep now and I woke up now. So then your watch is doing nothing for you. So an auto sleep mode is certainly critical. Particularly for research purposes, it's important that there be a Bluetooth interface, but you can see that's pretty common now, and that they be waterproof. So again, you're looking to prevent individuals from taking the watch off, because as soon as they do, they lose it or they forget to put it back on. So having to take it off to shower or bathe or swim is actually a downside of the device. So you can see more and more of them are getting around that as well. Price point is okay, it is a concern, and you can see that there's a reasonable consistency that a lot of these fall into the $100 range. The more you get into something like the research-based device, which is the Philips in red there, you can see they get more expensive. And then you have other technologies that can make something more expensive as well. So the Oura Ring has a higher price, partly because they had to make their device so small. And then they also, you can see that they have additional measurements. In addition to actigraphy, they're picking up on heart rate, respiration, and then they have the gyroscope in there. And then everybody knows often, or many people know, that the Fitbit Versa is almost like an Apple Watch. So that one has a lot more technology as well. Remote monitoring is now something that I think is super important for somebody that wants to use one of these devices in the field, particularly for a study, because it allows you to get that information and know that the person's actively, they're keeping the watch on, that it's constantly getting data uploaded to the web. And I can then see from the lab that that person down in Springfield has been wearing it all week. And in fact, I can even see what their data looks like, all without me having to go to them and download their data. So remote monitoring is certainly an important direction. It's currently hard to find on some of these devices, and it's currently pretty expensive to get. But it is certainly getting better. And that's something that's important for people that are adopting these for any kind of study. And again, for research-based use for this and of these devices, another area of interest is whether you can access the raw data. So most of them, including Fitbit, the data is proprietary and you can't get access to it without some tricks. So the maybe for the Fitbits, for instance, is that you can use something called Fitabase, which you can pay money to, and they will do the work to help you get access to that data. And then finally, the bottom row is just showing, like, of course, people want a valid device. And so those are just color coding how they did in various different measures of validity. But this as a whole is showing, my point with sharing this slide is that there's a lot to think about regarding a device, an actigraph-based device, to say whether it's something that would be useful in a study. So if I'm advising somebody on a potential study, I would say whether it's valid is certainly an important thing to consider, but now what are these other factors? How important those other factors are really depends upon the population you're working with and the kind of data you're trying to get. So we've collected now a number of studies with industry partners that have looked at sleep measurement with novel devices and collected in novel locations. And we've had several successful studies in that realm. I can't show that data, but as part of one of them, We also compared the gold standard to some other devices. I showed part of this earlier with the deep light versus deep sleep data, but we also looked at these devices, just their basic total sleep time measurements. And here you can see that tight fit of these dots around the midline is a sign that the Fitbit did really well there. The other one that does well, maybe not surprisingly, is the research-based actigraph. I mean, that's why we use it for research, is we can access the raw data and we can score it by hand. And so that data, it's a lot more intricate and nuanced, but it's pretty accurate. This also gives you a feel for that wide array of performance of other devices that, as I said, haven't even lasted in the field for the 3 years after that study was done. But we've had success on the sleep lab doing some of these studies, and this is the kind of work that is feasible and of interest to us to continue doing, because it's really a big need in the market. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is studies that are interested in intervening on sleep. So in some cases, we want to have good devices like these consumer-based devices under the idea that if I give somebody feedback on their sleep, they then can help improve their sleep. So if I look at my Fitbit and it's telling me that I had low sleep efficiency, or I was up a few times during the night, the idea is that maybe I can use that information to make my sleep better. Of course, many of these devices lack that interface where I can take the information the device gives me and translate it into, okay, what do I have to do to make it better? But nonetheless, some of these devices are designed with that intent, and some of them are improving that interface, the web-based interface they have with the consumer, in order to improve how they can utilize that feedback. But there's been a lot of other interest in, can we create devices to intervene on sleep and improve it for a participant in ways other than giving them feedback about their sleep? So for instance, Tom Brady is the man behind the Under Armour pajamas that are supposed to be smart pajamas that help you sleep better. There's also app-based ways of sleeping better. This one is focused on helping you use mindfulness as a way to improve your sleep. There's different aromatherapies that are getting more and more tech-based, surprisingly, as a way to help you sleep better. And even something like the weighted blanket market, which is all a way to try to improve your sleep, help you sleep better, as a way to help you maximize those outcomes from sleep. This is just a small dabbling of a ton of products that are coming out lately that are really have this goal of, can I improve your sleep to then give you better sleep-related outcomes? Now, we haven't worked with any of these in particular, but we have worked with similar on a few of these. And we've had a lot of success, I'll say, in implementing these and then looking for any signs of improvement on the individual's sleep. This is something that we're continuing to do, and we've really worked out how we can design these interventions depending upon how strong you think your intervention is. And so this is I just wanted to point out that this is really another component of the work that we've been doing, is designing these intervention studies. One study I can briefly say something about that comes from our federally funded work is, can we extend the sleep in kids? And we were particularly interested in kids with ADHD. And the approach that we used there was simply to get them to have a longer sleep opportunity. And it does work. So meaning that if I can have parents give the children longer sleep opportunities, if you extend that opportunity by about an hour and a half, they will extend their sleep by about 45 minutes. And I think the take-home message there is that we can shift sleep, and we can shift sleep based on, in some very behavioral ways, and you might be able to likewise do it in some very tech-based ways. But that's really an important goal right now, with some exciting research to try to address it. And next, I wanted to address our facilities. So many of you have seen our facilities, but for those that haven't, I think this is my chance to brag. So we have 3 bedrooms, and those bedrooms, 2 of the bedrooms are separated by an observation room. Most of the equipment that we're working with is now wireless, and we can do remotely, which was good for over the pandemic. We could bring most of the equipment even right to the participants' homes. But when they are in the lab, we have them in the bedrooms, and we can be watching the data either live or post study in the observation room. It's no small thing that we have a laundry facility because that allows us to take care of our linens on site. And then for the comfort of our participants, we have restrooms and showers, which allows them to come in for the studies, stay in the bedrooms, go over to the kitchen and put together a breakfast, shower, and then go to work. That really both makes it more inviting for the participants, but it also increases our ability to schedule individuals because we can then schedule them on weekdays and get them in before school or work. And so that's really worked out well and maximizes our ability to utilize the space. Equipment-wise, so I already showed you the different things that we're working with, the devices that we're working with. So we, as part of the Sleep Labs services, have research-based actigraphs that we can deploy for sleep studies. And we also have technicians that can score that data and get it right down to the deliverables that you're interested in, those being primarily total sleep time and sleep efficiency. But we also have various forms of polysomnography, which includes ambulatory polysomnography that could be done at an individual's home. Like, as I said, over the pandemic, we were able to go for a very lightweight form of this polysomnography that we can talk through with the participant how to equip themselves even right off Zoom. So that gives us a lot of flexibility, allows us to expand our recruitment range because now we're not asking for them to come and go from the lab. We can actually go to them, help them set it up, and they hopefully sleep better also when they're doing this right in their own home. So you do make some compromises there because they don't have quite the extensive array of electrodes that's important for some studies, but it's certainly a good option for some populations and some study questions. Finally, we have the high density polysomnography. So some of those pictures you saw that they're wearing a cap with a lot of electrodes over the head. And that data is really useful for people that are digging into some more deep physiology questions, like really trying to understand that sleep signal and the sleep physiology, which the opportunity there then is to say, where can I, if I'm going to create a better device, where's my best opportunity to put it? If we understand better the underlying physiology of those signals and where it's coming from and how they differ across the head, we can then develop a more smart sensor that's able to kind of really capture it close to the source and the most consistent source. So that's the overview of what we do and why. And the goal now is to have any discussion and answer questions that people might have regarding our capability or regarding projects that we've done. So if there's questions, I think you can either put it in the chat, which I'll monitor, or you're welcome to shout it out. I see Beth, I think.
I love this stuff. Oh my God, it's so fascinating. My big question is, I always have worked in a critical care setting where people do not sleep at all. And I mean, the patients actually go crazy because they don't sleep. And I'm wondering, is that a setting that has been monitored? Is there any way to look at how people sleep with all that, it's all they're monitored and all things going on, because it's dangerous for them?
Yeah, it's a great point. And we see a lot of people talk about it on the sleep science side. We don't see a lot of talk about it on the implementation side. So what we see is that, there's indeed a lot of studies going on that show that how poor sleep is in those settings. And even in acute, but even in rehabilitation settings where it's longer term, there's a lot of sources of sleep disruption that are, seem like a potential place for improvement of care. But I don't see a lot of activation based on that data. So there's some studies, even recent studies, that show they break down the sources that are of awakenings, right? And so some of it is simply lighting that, you go into it. So put it this way, if you or I are sleeping in a hotel room, we're likely to have our sleep onset disturbed by even just small lights in the room. Now, if you take somebody in a clinical setting, they don't have just small lights. They don't have just like an LED in the corner. There's like a light coming in from the door across the room. There's major light disturbance to their sleep. So it's light, it's sound, and then it's disruptions for taking various measurements or providing medication. So some of those might be less changeable, but we have some very changeable opportunities to allow them to sleep better. And I don't know why that's not, I mean, it's inconvenient maybe, why the care settings haven't improved based on that.
Yeah, just there's a commercial on TV now about, and it says, if the room isn't dark, I don't know if this is correct or not, but it says, if the room isn't dark, you can't sleep. Oh, if you can't close your eyes, you can't sleep. And so many of the patients in the ICU, they don't close their eyes.
Yeah.
They're in a constant, I mean, is that true?
Yeah, I mean, you could sleep. You just have to be a lot more sleep deprived to get to sleep, put it that way. Certainly there's, some tales of people that are incredibly sleep deprived and their brain is basically asleep while they're seemingly awake. So it's feasible, but you'd have to be pretty much, your ability to sleep is, you'd have to be far more sleep deprived to get to that point that your brain is actually sleeping, in the case that you can't block that light out. Yeah.
Okay, because that made me think, why not put like eye masks on people?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you could do. Eye mask is certainly a great one, to just help them sleep, given, let's say these conditions aren't changeable. I can't turn the hallway lights out. I need to leave the door open, things like that. Maybe they're sharing rooms, and so you have to have a light on. There are opportunities like eye masks are certainly one. Also to minimize noise. White noise is a great way to just minimize close to the person. You can minimize the noises that are further away from the person. These are all things that I also recommend at hotel rooms.
Yeah.
So you really could help an individual sleep. And I really don't have a reason why they don't do that more. But light is one of those that is really detrimental to sleep onset, but also to staying asleep. And most people in care settings they can fall asleep okay. It's the middle of the night awakenings that are hard. And those would be more preventable with these methods as well.
Right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's
a big issue. It's a big issue in the ICU. I mean, people get delirious. And they're crazed for like another 2 years because of what went on in the ICU.
Yeah. And so you can imagine in the work that we do, we have plenty of data to say that should also impede recovery, right? So
yes.
We know having less sleep is causes a poor immune function. We know having less sleep causes poor learning. So if you have somebody that's trying to go through rehabilitation where their objective is to learn some new way of of life, they're not going to learn as well. I mean, all of these things, their recovery in a lot of different ways, physically and mentally, is tied to sleeping well. And yet we've been consistently compromising their sleep in that setting. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for that question. Yes. I can't see a name here.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi.
So there we go. I see your name now. So hot. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the talk. I have two questions actually. The first one is about like the metrics of sleep monitoring. So I know that there are a lot of like different sort of like metrics, like total sleep time is one of them, of course, and like these wearable devices out there are more focused in some part of both based on their like ability and other factors. They're more focused on some of these metrics, but I'm wondering like what are the best metrics actually to measure sleep? Like I don't know, like each metric is good for some purposes, of course, but what is like the interest actually for both customer, like consumers, and also like for patients, or in general, what is like the best metrics that and it's like the gap, the commercial devices cannot do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. In some ways, I would say it really kind of does depend. What's important for a person. If I could change one thing about their sleep, I would stick generally with that. At the end of the day, it's how much sleep you're getting. And so total sleep time is, of course, important. So it's hard to say that that wouldn't be my number one measure. At the end of the day, you have to have enough sleep. Now, what that magic number is something that even a sleep scientist doesn't know the answer to, but certainly more is better. If I'm trying to move the bar, I want to move that. Now, that said, your question is a good one because I keep throwing out this term sleep efficiency, and that's probably my big number two. And sleep efficiency means when you were in bed, how much of that time did you spend asleep? And so it ends up to be a number that's a percent. I was asleep 90% of the night, for instance, right? So and the night's defined as the time I went to bed to the time I woke up. But, maybe it took me a little bit to fall asleep, and hey, maybe I was awake for 20 minutes in the middle of the night. So sleep efficiency is, to me, an important number because it's getting at the consistency of your sleep. So it's kind of the insomnia measure, right? So if I was in bed for 8 hours, but I stayed awake for 2 hours maybe I was even in bed for 10 hours, but 2 hours in the middle of the night, I was wide awake and I couldn't do anything. And so I turned the lights on. 2 hours in the middle of the night, I still had 8 hours of sleep. But that 8 hours of sleep with this 2 hour block in the middle of being wide awake and annoyed is not as good as 8 hours straight, right? And so that's why it's important to not just think, how long did a person sleep? Both of those cases, they slept 8 hours, but how consistent was that sleep or efficient was that sleep? And so we do think efficiency is important. I can't just say efficiency though, because if you could have a very efficient, very short sleep out, right? Like you could go to bed and sleep. I bet you could sleep fine for 4 hours and your sleep efficiency would look great, but that's also not enough, right? So it's kind of this combination of how long you slept and then how consistent was that sleep. So I think that those would be the top two things that I would look for. And frankly, when I talk about the actigraph data, that's the things that they tend to be good at those measurements. And so that's why I think for a lot of studies, those two measures are sufficient. I'm going to throw one more thing out there only because it complicates what some people think of. And that is that there's a couple studies now that show that consistent sleep is also important, meaning it's less important that I have 8 hours, as close to 8 hours as possible every night, and more that I can do it the same thing night after night. So rather than trying to consistently aim for 8 hours and hey, I'm 3 days a week, I can only do 5, but then I make up for it on the weekends. Rather than trying to do that, you're better at finding a time that you can maintain as consistently as possible. So I'd be better off aiming for 7 and plus or minus 1 hour. And so that I'm always trying to be as consistent as possible, even if it's at a little shorter time interval. So there seems to be something important about sleep consistency, that you're trying to go to sleep and wake up at the same time day after day. And some of that is because you get yourself into a really bad sleep spiral. So if you sleep too long on night X, you're going to have less sleep pressure at the end of the day for sleep the night Y. And then that night you maybe, you slept too long on the first night, so then you couldn't fall asleep the next night. And so then that one causes too much pressure the next night. And you can see how you kind of just lose this equilibrium with your sleep if you sleep inconsistently. And we certainly see that as a problem in a lot of the college student populations who do, and that's this term social jet lag that you'll hear out there now. And that's when people make up for lost weekday sleep by long weekend sleep. It's also part of the detriment in shift workers. Most often the shift workers go 4 on, 4 off, and you can imagine then you're building up this pattern of undersleep, oversleep, undersleep, oversleep. And it's really hard to go to bed that next night just because you've trained yourself into this different schedule. So we as adults are particularly bad at having that flexibility of doing different things night to night. Turns out kids and adolescents are a little better at it, thankfully, because they do it to themselves a lot. But it's really hard on the adult brain to have that, inconsistency of sleep patterns. So those would be my 3 things. Back to your question, those would be my 3 key measures. Again, it depends a lot on the study question, but if I said, what should the general public or a consumer be interested in about their sleep? those are really those things that I think are most important.
Actually, this is great because I'm working on this like a textile based sleep mask, and so the good thing about it like is that we're able to actually capture EEG, like brain activity. But I'm wondering, like, okay, with like that brain like activity and everything, we can have like more precise and accurate maybe like measures of the sleep stages. We can also have like a spindles, K complexes, and different stuff. But so it would be good for some population, of course, especially when we are looking at some, but in a general audience, like when we are thinking about the consumers, like if we just give them a lot of information about their sleep and sleep stages,
Yeah.
what should they do with this knowledge? I mean, like during like the amount of like the duration of the sleep, they can do something about it. They can improve it for the next night. But when they have different sort of like metrics, this is again about like the intervene that you mentioned, maybe
Yeah.
because they don't know what to do. Like, okay, I
Yeah.
have like these metrics, but yeah.
That's why I think it's funny for how much the consumer devices, when they're trying to put out these different sleep stages, it's kind of a funny thing because people don't know what to do with it. I mean, I think people have this kind of, oh, I know that, I've heard these terms slow wave sleep and REM, and they're good for me. They don't know though that like stage 2 is also good for you. I'd say stage 1's the only one that I'd be like, yeah, that doesn't really do much. It's really just a transitional stage between wake and sleep. And so the only thing that I think that these devices could do better by having that information is saying that sleep is not really good sleep. So sometimes if you're maybe you fall asleep in the car or an airplane and you feel like you're asleep but not really asleep, that was probably stage 1 sleep. And I think it's a fallacy for people to think that that was the same sleep as a night that you were actually sleeping in your bed and you got that solid sleep, and because physiologically it's doing something different for you. So I do think the advantage of these devices for being able to distinguish sleep stages is less about telling the consumer you had this many minutes of slow wave sleep or REM, because they don't know. It's all important and they don't know what to do with it. But what's important by getting that information is, number one, your measures of sleep are going to be more accurate, because if you truly have the EEG as well as enough information to distinguish wake from REM, then you know that that person was actually asleep, versus when an actigraph tells me I'm asleep, I could have just been lying really still and fooled it, right? Or if my PSG is telling me that they're asleep, but I don't distinguish sleep stages, well, they could have been all in non-REM one sleep. So the advantage of knowing sleep stages is mostly that you're giving them a more accurate measure of what is true sleep. I think to tell the general public, like you had slow wave sleep or you had non-REM 2 sleep that they've never even heard of, but makes up 40% of the night, that's not useful to them. And even me as a sleep scientist, I'd say like naps are really good, but naps don't contain REM. So, for a nap, that was good because, well, you got stage 2 and slow wave sleep. But for your overnight sleep, it's not just that I want you to have that, it's that I want you to have this nice cycling between those things. Well, that's something we never spit out to them. Sometimes you'll show them a hypnogram and they can see that they've done something zigzaggy, but we're never giving them some measure of, this is how nice your sleep cycles were. And to me, at the end of the day, that's probably what's important. And again, they're never given enough information to appreciate that as being the objective.
Yeah, and I think intervening also is another important thing to do, because at the end of the day, the person may not be expert and do not know how to improve it, right? It's not good, but you don't know how to improve it. So yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say on that one is the sleep efficiency measure is the one that's a percent. So what percent of time in bed were you asleep? And so a lot of people are like trained from being in their classes, like, oh, I want 100. Everybody thinks I need 100% to be good. For sleep efficiency, 100% is bad, because that means that you fell asleep the second your head hit the pillow. That means you're sleep deprived. So I would actually say 100% is not your objective with sleep efficiency. So that too just gets at the fact that these devices are spitting out a number. Sometimes they call it your sleep score, or they call it sleep efficiency. And people don't know what to do with it, because if you're going to constantly be aiming for 100%, you're going to be working pretty hard in the wrong direction. You're trying to like sleep better, but if you're actually trying to sleep better, then it's going to be harder to hit that 100% value. So that again gets back to the fact that I think that there's a lot of work to be done even at the interface side of, okay, now we're giving them data. Something like the Fitbit can give them semi-accurate data, but how can that data be usable and interpretable to the participant? How can they know, okay, this is what that value means, and now what are some things that I can do in my life to make that number change in a reasonable way?
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Questions? Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Did I see any other hands? No, I think we're good.
Okay, great. Great. Thank you, Becky. And thank you all for attending today's seminar. Our next seminar is scheduled for Tuesday, October 5th, which we'll be learning about the unique capabilities of the advanced print and roll-to-roll facility with Director Jeff Morse. So I hope to see you there. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.